Shh, shh, shh. The shh always works. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Jo Meissner. I'm Vice President for Communications and Public Affairs here at the Boston Foundation. It's just a real pleasure to have you here tonight. The sun's out. Last time we did one of these centennial parties, it was snowing. So we, I think, have kind of hit the right season now. Thank you for joining us for a celebration of really essentially you. You and the important work and the innovative work that you have done for our organizations in our community of Boston. Tonight we are continuing to celebrate our 100th anniversary. We were established in 1915 and we decided we're going to start our parties on January 1st, and we've had many of them throughout the year, and we've got many more to come. But this time we're celebrating the release of a second centennial book. Back in February when the mayor was with us, we gave him an honorary snow shovel because it was snowing. We released our history book, and I think many of you have received it. I hope you have. If you haven't, please let us know because we want to give it to you. Now we're releasing a book that really talks about this extraordinary role that the Boston Foundation, we are so happy and pleased to talk about, that we've played over the years in providing critical early support to many organizations and to many ideas. It's titled There at the Beginning, How the Boston Foundation Took a Chance on More Than 100 Great Ideas That Worked. And we invited you here tonight because you represent the organizations that are profiled in that book. And we're delighted to celebrate your achievements. So I want to thank, first of all, the wonderful young musicians from the nonprofit group Zoomix that you heard playing. The Boston Foundation was proud to have been there at the beginning for Zoomix when it was launched in 1991. The group that played tonight is called Maddie and the Push-Ups. They consist of Omar Sosa on guitar, David Arias on bass, and vocalist Janara Bourguignon. So let's give them another round of applause. Zoomix was created with the goal of using music to lure kids out of gangs and off the streets of East Boston. It was grown from 24 young people playing and writing music in a loft in East Boston to more than 500 children today. Children and teens who play, write, and record songs in a beautifully restored firehouse in that same neighborhood. I want to thank Kathy Clute, our communications manager, who did just a marvelous job as the writer of this book. Kathy, where are you? And I also want to thank Barbara Hinley, our Senior Director for Publications, who served as editor of this book in so many different roles of communications and marketing for the Boston Foundation. And she's been writing on this topic of There at the Beginning for many years. So Barbara, where are you? Our deep appreciation as well goes to our talented, incredibly talented graphic designer, Kate Canfield, who brought the stories in this book to life through her beautiful design work. Kate, are you here? And then our wonderful photographer, Richard Howard. 45 photos in this book, and when you see it, you're just going to love it, are Richard's work. But most of all, I want to thank all of you who helped us put this book together by telling your stories. Many of you spent hours with us over the last year. We enjoyed working closely with you so that we could accurately portray your origins, your progress over the years, and the role that the Boston Foundation played in helping you grow. So some of the great ideas reflected in this book started with just a couple of people talking and jotting down their ideas. Others sprang from the passion of people who saw enormous need and wanted to meet it. And more than one was developed in reaction to experiences of unspeakable loss. But seeds don't yield fruit until they're planted and given the chance to grow, and neither do great ideas. That's why the Boston Foundation provided critical early support to the 114 nonprofits, ideas, and collaborations chronicled in this book for more than 100 years. And so tonight I'd like to give you a brief sampling of just a few of those stories you'll read when you take the book home tonight. So the earliest there at the beginning story in the book involves kids and music, just like ZoomX. But this one goes back to the Foundation's very first year of grant making. That was in 1917, when it made a $250 investment in the South End Music School. That would be about $5,000 today. That's still a small investment, but what a tremendous return. In 1917, South End Music School taught violin and piano to young children, and from the beginning it was committed to serving Boston's diverse communities. Back then, it was the only place that African American children could go for music lessons. Today, that organization is called the Community Music Center of Boston, and it provides musical instruction to more than 1,000 children every year. So the impulse to help launch new nonprofits was there at the beginning from the Foundation's very earliest years, even though the Foundation's resources were somewhat limited for its first 50 years or so. It always invested in the best ideas we think that came walking through the door. For instance, in the 1950s, the Foundation awarded a $10,000 grant, a very large sum in those days, to expand our city's educational horizons through the support of a public television station for Boston. And on May 2nd, 1955, WGBH signed on to the airwaves. Less than a decade later, one of the station's most beloved programs, and frankly, a personal favorite of mine, I watched this in Chicago as a child with my mother, first aired, and I just love this photo of Julia Child wielding her butcher knife. And by the way, the Julia Child opened a designated fund here at the Boston Foundation to celebrate professional study in the art of, what else, cooking. Today, it continues to support students who want to follow in her very large footsteps. Today, WGBH is the leading producer of content for PBS and the creator of groundbreaking programs such as Nova, Frontline, Masterpiece Theater. After that first $10,000 grant, the Foundation continued to fund WGBH for years and then established a designated fund here at the Foundation to provide annual support. And we continue to support them. Most recently, Sing That Thing, a new TV series that showcases the best amateur choirs in Greater Boston. Liz Chang is here with us today. We are so proud we were there at the beginning for the Boston Arts Academy because the Boston Arts Academy won Sing That Thing. And that's their spiritual ensemble, and that was just this last weekend. One of the newest stories you'll find in this book involves a slightly larger investment. The Foundation provided a grant of $100,000 to Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation towards the transformation of the old Pearl Meats factory in the Grove Hall neighborhood of Dorchester. Just last year, the Bornstein and Pearl Food Production Center opened. Today, it's an economic development powerhouse, a 36,000 square foot facility that offers space for 20 food businesses, many of them owned by women and people of color. The Foundation also made a small investment just last year, just $7,500 through our Action Fund, in a brilliant idea called Smarter in the City. Based in Roxbury, it's the nation's first inner-city business accelerator for technology companies, and that investment is already starting to bear fruit. Like Bornstein and Pearl and Smarter in the City, many of the stories in the book reflect the foundation's impact on Boston's inner city neighborhoods over the years. For instance, we were there at the beginning for many of the community development corporations that have transferred our city's neighborhoods. One example is EBA, which was created through the courage and tenacity of Latino activists in the South End who stood up to the bulldozers of urban renewal. The Boston Foundation stood right behind them. We made an initial grant of $20,000 to launch their organization. And today, the result is the thriving Villa Victoria housing development, which has more than 1,000 units of housing and empowers thousands of low-income people through education and support services. Since our first grant in 1968, the foundation has provided EBA with more than $1.5 million in support. The foundation also made large and early investments in many of the community health centers in our city. We also helped to launch the umbrella organization, Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers, which reports that 1 in 8 residents in our state receive their health care through community health centers. Other stories in this book about the foundation's role in helping to build a world-class city, such as the early support for the transformation of the Quincy Market into Faneuil Hall Marketplace. It was an idea that many people thought was way too ambitious at the time, kind of crazy, but it led to the renaissance of Boston's entire waterfront. The Boston Foundation also played a critical role in the cleanup of the Boston Harbor, funding Conservation Law Foundation in the early 1980s to file the suits that eventually stopped the pollution of our harbor. The foundation went on to make an initial $60,000 grant to help launch Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, which had the goal of a swimmable harbor by 2000, and they achieved that goal. Since then, the foundation has invested more than $1 million in additional grants to that organization. And just this past week, if you read in the Globe, you saw that a report by Save the Harbor, Save the Bay shows that Boston's beaches are among the cleanest in the country, cleaner than Miami and Waikiki. You will also read about several nonprofit organizations the foundation invested in that began in Boston, but were so successful they expanded to many other cities. One is the iconic City Year, which received grants totaling $125,000 from the foundation in the early 1990s to develop its revolutionary youth volunteer model, which became the model for Bill Clinton's AmeriCorps program. Today, City Year operates in 250 high-need urban schools in 25 U.S. cities. Can you imagine a time when there was no City Year? Another is Citizen Schools, which was founded in 1995 with a $25,000 startup grant for the foundation to give kids in low-income neighborhoods the chance to apprentice with adult mentors from local companies. Today, Citizen Schools serves thousands of low-income students in a total of 7 states. And then there's Year Up, launched by Gerald Chertavian in 2001 with a $50,000 startup grant from the foundation. Gerald often speaks of the significance of that initial grant, which, as he puts it, was a seal of approval in Boston that encouraged others to work with him. That organization's goal is to tackle the opportunity divide by hands-on skill training, corporate internships that prepare our young urban adults for well-paying jobs and for college. Since its original grant, the foundation has given more than $1 million in additional funding to Year Up. And now it's in 13 American cities, reaching almost 3,000 young people. And finally, you'll find stories in our book about the coalitions and public policy work the foundation has launched to take on some of our community's greatest challenges. In the area of education, the Boston Foundation formed the Race to the Top Coalition, which helped to pass groundbreaking education reform legislation in 2010. The coalition also helped the Commonwealth place first in President Obama's Race to the Top competition and bring $250 million to Massachusetts to help support innovation in K-12 education. And in 2012, the foundation formed the Coalition for Community Colleges, made up of more than 65 business, civic, education, and community-based organizations, many of whom are in this room, that helped and were instrumental in helping Governor Patrick pass community college reform in 2015. The outcome of that legislation was the alignment of our state's increasing workforce needs with the education focus of community colleges and to increase accountability on their part. That legislation included $11 million in increased community college funding. And we are also very proud to have been one of the founders of Success Boston, which is aimed at dramatically increasing the number of BPS students completing college. Under the leadership of the Mayor's Office and with the Boston Public Schools, the Boston Private Industry Council, and with the UMass Boston and 38 other universities and colleges, we are focusing on low-income students of color, helping them to get ready, get in, and get through college, and then get connected to jobs. Success Boston has already moved the needle on college completion from 35% to 50%. In 2014, the foundation was awarded a $2.7 million grant from the Federal Social Innovation Fund to expand Success Boston. So beyond the grants and the success stories you'll read in this book, you're also going to learn about people who came to the Boston Foundation to ask, what do you think? Is there anyone else doing this work? And we think came out with good advice, some introductions, and a little bit of financial support. On the right here is Rebecca Oney, the founder of Health Leads, and you're going to hear from her shortly. You'll be introduced to visionary leaders who realize their dreams against all odds. This is, of course, Hubie Jones, who served in so many of Boston's most successful nonprofits, including the Boston Children's Chorus. And people like Mona Lisa Smith, who said enough to youth violence and launched the increasingly powerful nonprofit called Mothers for Justice and Equality. So finally, I hope you will see that the Boston Foundation has always passionately believed that a community foundation's highest calling is to build community. As we celebrate 100 years of impact, this book is a tribute to that passion and to all of you. Makes me choked up. This is the moment when I introduce our President and CEO, Paul Gordon.
Well, thank you very much, and Mary Jo, that was just superb. And by now, the agenda for the evening must be clear to all of you. The Boston Foundation is going to take complete credit for everything that you've accomplished. That was the plan. How are we going to celebrate the centennial? This is how we're going to celebrate. You know, this there at the beginning stuff actually started quite a while ago in terms of our awareness of it. And it really had to do with my joining the foundation now nearly 14 years ago, and having been in the housing and community development field, I was well aware that in that arena, the Boston Foundation had been the birth mother of an astonishing number of important organizations that had made Boston one of the premier cities in the country for neighborhood revitalization. You know, from supporting the first CDC in the city, Bob Whittlesy's here tonight, now called Community Builders, bringing LISC to Boston, supporting critical advocacy efforts like CHAPA and the Mass Association of CDC. So I thought I was very curious to look at the other broad interests of the foundation and see if there were similar stories. And I went to Bob Wadsworth, who had been at the foundation for many, many years. Unfortunately, Bob was unable to be with us tonight because of an illness in the family. But you know, I remember saying to him, give me your Dave Letterman top 10. You know, if you had to defend the tax exemption of the Boston Foundation in the next 5 minutes, what would you say? And he said, I'll tell you what I'd say. We helped to found this organization. We got that started, and it really blew me away. And that led in turn to wanting to really be more systematic in rooting out these stories from our kind of distant and neglected past. And very fortunately, a wonderful person who's here tonight, Patricia Brady, who now is the director of publications for Bunker Hill Community College, but we had been colleagues in the White administration, and she had been doing some consulting for the foundation for Anna Faith Jones, my predecessor, and she was persuaded to do a little history, and I asked her, don't go back to the beginning, but go back to the 50s, and admittedly with 20/20 hindsight, pull out of the archives and the annual reports and the records the greatest hits of the Boston Foundation, and she did that. And you know, the results, as you have seen and we'll see further in the book, are mind-blowing, that a single organization was responsible for getting so many things going or supporting them at a very early stage, and the number of those organizations that had grown up, as we've seen, to be very, very significant in our community. And she did a spectacular job, and we had a board of directors dinner to present her findings, and she did that, and very witty presentation, but also just stunning for the board. And one a great board member of ours, Bob Glassman, the founder of Wainwright Bank, said at the end, he said, you know, I've been on this board for 8 years. I've been involved with the Boston Foundation for, I think, 20 years. I thought I was paying attention. I didn't know any of this. And that's a problem that foundations have that we want to correct. We want to be an outlier because it's terribly important that these institutions be known and held accountable and so forth. And of course, we're not really taking credit for all you've accomplished. As Mary Jo said, you are the heroes of this story. I do think it has mattered that we have had a community foundation that had two qualities. One was flexible capital from nearly the beginning. A prominent mill owner named James Longley, who was a director of the Safe Deposit and Trust Company, which birthed the Boston Foundation in 1915, died a year later and left us $4 million of unrestricted money. $4 million in 1916. And that allowed the foundation to develop much sooner than almost any other community foundation, and there were a number of them being formed at that time, to be able to make decisions about investments and to try to come up with how do we invest this capital in our community. And so that flexible capital, which we've endeavored to maintain, has been crucial. But the other thing, and this can be quite rare in the foundation world, was a receptivity to new ideas. Somehow the founders and early supporters of this organization understood that this is an innovative city. And we've been innovative in business and science and law and politics and medicine, but we are innovative in the social sector as well. So for a very long time, long before I and the current cast of characters arrived, this foundation was willing to make informed bets on completely untried and untested ideas or ideas for new institutions. And as such, it has, I think, been an important part of what we might think of as the nonprofit ecosystem of this community. The ability, as occurs in business, for promising new ventures to acquire the capital to go forward and to test their ideas has just been a terribly important dimension of the philanthropic and nonprofit worlds that we fortunately inhabit in this rare community. And one of the commitments we're making in this centennial is to do everything we can to ensure that the foundation is capable of doing that for the foreseeable future. And that's our permanent endowment that generates the unrestricted money that we can decide to deploy, and that has been the money that has gone to all the organizations we just heard about. And our endowment of our roughly $1 billion, $300 million is unrestricted endowment. That's pretty good, but there is tremendous pressure on that money. And so we've made a commitment to try to generate about $200 million of new commitments to the permanent fund, many of which will be in the form of bequests, but it establishes that pipeline. I'm happy to report to you tonight that we're over 170 million as we sit here today. 170 million. Our board felt very strongly going into the centennial year that while we were going to talk about the history in the past and celebrate that this really should be about the future and securing what has been so valuable, and we hope that using this centennial to elevate the importance of flexible capital and to grow that unrestricted endowment, we hope that that is a very important result of this celebration. So again, thank all of you for being here and for what you do, most of all, but also for being willing to be part of this very special project. I feel so proud that the history and the There at the Beginning book are going to be valuable, valuable documents for a very, very long time to this institution and this community, and we couldn't have done it, could not have done it without you. Now we're going to hear from two people who have lived this story in their own way, and I'm very pleased again to introduce Rebecca Oney, the founder of what was first called Project Health and is now Health Leads. She came as a college student to the Boston Foundation with an idea that hospitals could prescribe more than medicine to their patients. They could help patients with non-medical resources like job training, child care, and housing. And she launched an organization now called Health Leads, and her idea was so brilliant that it has since spread to 6 other cities. Rebecca's been awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant and many other awards. I kid her that she's going to have a wing of her house just to house the awards that she's received. But the kind of innovator that walked in here with no track record, and walked out with some support and turned it into a nationally significant enterprise. Please welcome Rebecca Oney.
So I want to start by saying how young I looked in that picture. And apparently, trying to create social change really ages you. That's my main takeaway from this whole thing. I was like a child. What was that? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul, and the rest of the foundation staff for inviting me to be part of such a momentous occasion, which it truly is. And it's a huge honor to be in a room full of kindred spirits who have literally dedicated their lives to making Boston a better place in every possible way. So in many ways, Health Leads' work and my work, as Paul said, began at the Boston Foundation. So the title of the book, There at the Beginning, is a bit of a personal journey for me and this notion of kind of coming full circle myself. So for me, the journey began 19 years ago when, as a college student, I learned about the work that Dr. Barry Zuckerman was doing at what was then Boston City Hospital. And with his blessings, spent about 6 months of my sophomore year wandering around this huge public hospital and basically having conversations with physicians in which we asked them, if you had unlimited resources, what's the one thing you would give your patients? And we heard the same story again and again, which we've heard hundreds of times, probably thousands of times since then at hospitals across the country, where they would say, every day we have a child that comes in with an asthma exacerbation, and we can prescribe a controller medication, but we know that the real issue is that there's no food at home. We know that the real issue is that this child's living with 12 other people in a dilapidated brownstone with mold and asbestos. And we don't ask about those issues because there's nothing we can do. We have 13 minutes with each patient. Patients are piling up in the clinic waiting room. We weren't trained to deal with this stuff in med school. And sure, we have a social worker, but there's one of her for tens of thousands of our patients. So Health Leads was born of this reality. In the clinics where we work, physicians, nurses, and other healthcare providers can prescribe basic resources like food, heat, and electricity the same way they would prescribe medication. And patients then take those prescriptions to Health Leads' desk in the clinic waiting room, where we now have a core of about 750 college student advocates who work side by side with about 15,000 patients each year to connect them to the community resources that they need in order to be healthy in 7 cities across the country. So we started in 1996, literally with a card table in the clinic waiting room, totally lemonade stand style. And we just had this, I kid you not, this construction paper sign that said help desk. And notwithstanding this, we thought and dreamed that we were on to something really big. And we were naively but single-mindedly convinced that others would obviously see the same. So shortly after I graduated from college, I submitted a $24,000 request to the Boston Foundation for our desk in the clinic waiting room. And as Paul said, I will be honest, I had no idea at all what I was doing. I mean, truly. Health Leads at that point in time, we didn't have stacks of data. We didn't have a long track record. We didn't have a seasoned senior leadership team to back up the proposal. But what we had was these incredibly compelling accounts from physicians and nurses and patients about how the healthcare system as currently designed utterly failed them when it came to actually achieving health. And the conviction that only by addressing the realities of patients' lives could we actually achieve the healthcare system that we seek. So in making this kind of courageous leap of faith grant to Health Leads, our very first from any foundation, even when there was no good reason to do so, the foundation literally birthed Health Leads. And from that first kind of critical investment, the foundation, Health Leads has flourished. And what I think was so powerful about that early investment by the foundation was not just now, years later, that it's enabled us to meet the needs of tens of thousands of patients across the country, but how it reflected the foundation's prescient understanding of the arc of healthcare in this country. And this notion that there would come a day when fee-for-service healthcare starts to collapse under its own weight. And healthcare institutions would start talking about population health and patient-centered care and value-based payments. And in this context, the foundation's early investment in Health Leads was critical, because it meant that when we then had 1,000 expansion requests from healthcare institutions flood us over the past 2 years, we were ready for that because of the foundation's early investment. So I like to kind of think about the foundation as a bit of a guardian angel to Health Leads. And I was thinking about this on the way over, and I was like, maybe that makes Paul Grogan like my fairy godfather or something. And then I thought how he would hate to hear me describe him as a fairy godfather. And I was like, well, then obviously I have to say that. But truly has been there for Health Leads at every key inflection point in our trajectory since then, really enabling Health Leads to show the healthcare sector that care can and should be delivered differently. So in 2010, Health Leads launched our proof plan to demonstrate once and for all that clinics, in fact, could be a gateway to connect patients to these resources that they need to be healthy. And with the foundation's reinvestment at that point in time, successfully moved our partner clinics from what they called a don't ask, don't tell approach to patient social needs to universal screening for these needs so that it literally became a standard of care, creating a powerful proof point for the rest of the country with respect to what's possible. Fast forward 4 years, in the face of those 1,000 expansion requests, we at Health Leads knew we were both poised and had an obligation to begin leveraging all of the learnings we developed to arm the growing number of healthcare institutions across the country that actually are seeking to tackle their patient social needs with the tools and insights to do so well. Now, with the foundation support again, Health Leads has recently launched our first pilot here in Boston at the Dimmock Center, training for the first time a clinic's own workforces to use our tools and technology platform to create high-quality patient resource connections. And by this fall, we'll actually launch a national platform so that hundreds of healthcare institutions across the country can access these tools, building from the learnings on the ground here in Boston enabled by the foundation's investment. So it's for these investments and for the leadership of the foundation that Health Leads and the tens of thousands of patients and hundreds of physicians and dozens of healthcare institutions with whom we've worked are so incredibly grateful. The Boston Foundation has truly been with us since the very beginning, but also at the beginning of each of our key inflection points since then, accelerating us towards a more just and rational healthcare system that we so desperately need in this country. And so because of this, we can begin to envision the day when the foundation publishes a book called There at the End, a book about all the organizations, like Health Leads, whose visions for health, for education, for peace, and for housing, in fact, were fully and finally realized, thanks to the continued leadership of the Foundation and to all of you in the room. Thank you so much to the Foundation for believing in us and our work, and for everything that you've done for this community.
Wow. Our final speaker is someone who is well known to just about everybody in this room, and that is the Reverend Ray Hammond, the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Boston, who has experienced the Boston Foundation in a lot of different ways, including as chairman of our board for 6 of the years that I've been here as CEO, and that's a whole other story in terms of what Ray has contributed, but it goes well beyond that. But of his many accomplishments and ventures, he was deeply involved in at least 3 of the organizations featured in the book, including the 10-Point Coalition, GBIO, and the Opportunity Agenda. So it's a great pleasure to introduce my friend, Ray Hammond.
Before I say a few words, I want us all to just close our eyes and take a few minutes to wrap our minds around the thought of Paul Grogan as a fairy godfather. I'm just going to meditate on that for a while. That's should be in the Globe tomorrow, right? I also want to congratulate the foundation on a masterful stroke in diversity. We've begun with a wonderful young woman who thinks she's feeling older, but you haven't gotten there yet, let me tell you. I am old, and I know it because my oldest daughter just sent her mother and me a subscription to Lumosity.com. So it is a privilege to be here, and I can't tell you how excited I am to participate in this 100th anniversary celebration of the Boston Foundation, and particularly this event that celebrates the role of the Foundation in being there at the beginning for organizations that have gone on to transform not only Boston, but our country and our world. In his introduction to another centennial publication called the Boston Foundation and the City of Ideas, Paul says one factor made the Boston Foundation unique among all the community foundations that were being formed around the same time. And he goes on to identify that unique factor as flexible capital, unrestricted funds that allowed the foundation to take risks and spur innovation. Now, I don't for one moment disagree with Paul at all, but I do have to add something from the cover of that same publication, as I insist that another special factor has been the Boston Foundation's laser focus on responding to need, seeding innovation, and changing the game. And I know what I'm talking about because I've had the privilege of being the chair of the board for the foundation and a grant recipient as a participant in several organizations for which the Boston Foundation was there at the beginning. The foundation was there when clergy and lay people in the communities most affected by violence decided to stop pointing fingers of blame and instead asking important questions about responsibility, asking what we can do in partnership with police and politicians, schools and courts to make our communities healthier, our children safer, our future brighter. The foundation was there when religious communities that at best ignored each other began to reach out to each other and join with unions and community coalitions in a common quest for equity and justice in healthcare, housing, public safety, and education. The foundation was there when funders challenged themselves to do the hard work of collaboration that they insisted their grantees do, when funders held themselves to the same standards of accountability for benchmarks and outcomes and impact to which they held their grantees. and when funders committed themselves not simply to good programs, but to sustainable system change, especially when it came to opportunities for immigrants and poor communities and communities of color that never quite got on the rungs of the opportunity ladder. I know the foundation was there because I saw it at work in the beginning of the Boston 10-Point Coalition, the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, and the Opportunity Agenda. And the foundation was there not only with funding, but with research and with capacity building and donor introductions and advice and counsel and organizational networking and political advocacy. I don't need to tell you that all of this required and still requires very generous donors, and the Boston Foundation has attracted and retained them, old and new, with incredible consistency. And all of this requires wonderful leadership. I've had the incredible privilege of serving under two amazing women, Anna Faith Jones and Helen Spalding, who set the stage for the Boston Foundation we celebrate today with incredible vision. I watched these two women make some of the city's bankers an offer they could not refuse. It was like they pulled a kind of godmothers on them, I mean, it was really incredible. And they gained control of the assets and the governance of this foundation. That freedom was the foundation on which the current leadership has done an absolutely masterful job of increasing philanthropy, strengthening programming, and advancing public policy that builds community for all. I can't say enough about Paul Grogan, the senior leadership, the board, and the staff of TBF, but I can tell you this: these are folks who are responding to need, seeding innovation, and changing the game. Folks at TBF, like many of you in this room, don't just talk about measures and outcomes and theories of change, they talk about justice and opportunity, with the fervor that reminds me of the old Hasidic story about a disciple who asks the rabbi, "Why does the Torah tell us to place these words upon our hearts? Why doesn't it tell us to place these words in our hearts?" And the rabbi answered, "It is because we, in our own strength, cannot place the words in our hearts. So we place them on our hearts, and there they stay until one day the heart breaks and the words fall in." At TBF, you work like those whose hearts have been broken by wounded lives, wasted potential, and missed opportunities. And into that break, those words, justice and opportunity, have fallen, found a home, and fired an unquenchable flame. That fire has kept you for a century from giving up on the least, the lost, and the left out. And it's kept you from giving up on a dream of a beloved community in which arts and culture, safety and prosperity, civic engagement, and social innovation flourish. And so my prayer is that the next 100 years might be even more fruitful, even more lustrous, even more powerful than the first 100 years. Boston Foundation, you've had a great run, and the best is yet to come. God bless you.
Among other things, Ray, that was such a reminder to me of why I insisted the whole time that you were chairman that when we did events together, I go first. I'm not following you. I'm not following you. Incredible. Okay, I think my role now is to make an announcement that we're going to cut a ribbon out here on the new display area, and you're all welcome to come out and join, and then we're going to continue the festivities, and there's going to be a cake as well. So again, thank you all for being here, and hope you can linger and enjoy the rest of the program. Thanks.
Kill him.